Hello and welcome to the Primary PE Huddle podcast, brought to you by Aspire Active Education. Aspire Active Education is a passionate family who all believe that PE, sport and physical activity are essential for children to develop a love of healthy living and to end physical inactivity forever. We've proven that working in collaboration with school leadership teams, PE subject leaders, teachers and all PE practitioners positively impacts the sustainability of schools, embedding a powerful physical curriculum and essentially helps more children be more active more. Our mission is to engage 1 million children in physical activity by 2025, and we hope this podcast brings others along our journey with us. Through this podcast series, we aim to discover the power behind PE, school sport and physical activity, specifically in primary schools, the impact this has on the whole school, the impact it has on pupils' holistic development, and the secrets behind the successful implementation of a powerful physical curriculum. This is what makes up the Primary PE Huddle. We won't be alone through this journey. We're joined by PE subject leaders, school and academy senior leadership teams, experts in the field of primary education, and representatives of key bodies who all share what physical activity means to them, how they use it as a tool to positively affect children and young people, and what they believe in the Primary PE Huddle. Our guests perform a deep dive on topics such as creating sustainable high-quality PE, the benefits of physical activity, a top-down collaboration to embed a physically active ethos, and sharing all the best practice from their own experiences to create an enthusiastic culture towards a healthy, active lifestyle. If you like what you hear, please leave us a review, subscribe wherever you get your pod. Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Primary PE Huddle. I've got two fantastic guests with me today. I've normally got one guest with me, so I'm outnumbered on this one, so please take it easy, gents. But I've got Alex and Andy. I'll let them do their own introductions as I normally do, so they can do it properly, and I don't undersell anyone. But now two fantastic fonts of knowledge, so hopefully some great gems coming from this one for you guys. If I come to you first, Alex, would you like to give us bit of an introduction to yourself, bit of a background, so everyone knows who we're listening to?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for the invitation. My name's Alex Ogden. I'm the Education Development Manager at the Yorkshire Sport Foundation. I'm sure many of you listening may not have heard of the Yorkshire Sport Foundation, but we are one of over 40 partnerships across the country, funded by Sport England and National Lottery money, to support the communities across West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire to be more physically active across the life course. So it's obviously my role at the foundation as Education Development Manager to work very closely with schools specifically, and also the partners and the wider system and stakeholders that support schools around PE, sport and physical activity, but tackling inequalities and bridging those gaps that we see across gender and social demographics, etc., is at the heart of our work. And I have a bit of a two-pronged role at the moment. My other role currently is as the National Partnerships lead for creating active schools, which I'm sure you'll hear a little bit more about today, probably.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to hone in on this episode, looking at activity within schools, physically active learning, and looking at strategies, obstacles to overcome. Alex obviously mentioned from Yorkshire Sport there. Those of you that aren't familiar with or haven't connected with the active partnerships around the country in your local area, please do. A huge asset for all schools to be linked up with. I dare say most of you are, but if you haven't or you don't think you're making the most of that, please reach out to them for sure. Loads of support there for schools. So we'll delve into that a little bit more in a moment. I'll pass over to Andy.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan. My main role is a reader in healthy childhood and physical activity at the University of Bradford. And as part of that role, I wear a number of different hats. So the first hat that I wear is I'm co-director for the Centre for Applied Educational Research in Bradford. And what's sort of really interesting about that role is living a life beyond physical activity. So looking at how do we reduce inequalities within education and how do we link health and education more closely together. Another hat that I wear is as a research director on the Sport England funded local delivery pilot in Bradford called JUMP. And that's a £12 million project where we're looking at taking a whole system approach to physical activity in children and young people. And we've got 15 interlinked work packages from changing policy to green spaces to working in religious settings and finally in schools. And then the third hat that I wear is the strategic lead for research and development on the Creating Active Schools programme, which in Bradford is enacted through the Jump Local Delivery Pilot. Then I also work with Alex nationally to support the rollout of CAS across England and also internationally. So quite often I get asked to go to other countries to talk about the work that we're doing in creating active schools.
Amazing. I definitely did the right thing in asking you both to introduce yourselves, because there was no way I was going to be able to get quite as much out myself, even with the knowledge of yourselves that I've got. So thank you very much for that. And like I said, we're going to delve into both of you. So I may ask you some off the cuff questions just to pick out some pieces, but I'll start with hopefully a simple one. I'll start with yourself, Andy. You mentioned a little bit there about the work that you're currently doing, but would you mind kicking us off by delving a little bit deeper in what you're doing currently with Bradford University?
Absolutely. So at the University of Bradford, we've established a physical activity research centre where we're particularly interested in children and young people. So our work, while it's focused in schools, and my particular research interest is in schools, it's looking at physical activity experiences of children across the broader system and how we take those whole system approaches to creating the kind of thriving environment within which children can succeed. But I guess for your listeners and what they're interested in today is that kind of schools piece. So what I'm really passionate about is actually how do we create cultural change in schools to promote physical activity? And we've been supporting schools within Bradford and beyond to use the Creating Active Schools framework to understand how do we change the culture of a school and what are the different factors that need to be addressed to enable that to happen. And then what does that look like in practice? And we've taken a really different approach with CAS, which traditionally what's happened with schools is we tend to overburden them by dropping down these kind of what we term singular interventions, but programs, one of the well-known ones like the Daily Mile, where generally what tends to happen is this project is dropped onto a school, it's picked up by a teacher who's normally fairly inspirational and has maybe a little bit of capacity. And while there's enthusiasm around that project, it tends to work. But then as the enthusiasm drops off, it tends to disappear. And the reason for that is the school culture hasn't changed. So it's not been embedded into things like the policies. Teachers aren't being trained to use it or appreciate why they need to use it. And then also, it doesn't necessarily land overly well with the pupils in a sustainable way. So with schools within the Jump project, but also working with the local authority through something called the RIC project and another area in Bradford, we've created this community of practice with schools and we're supporting to create that cultural change. We've been working for 4 years now, and what I would like to say has been a big success is we're seeing real positive effects. And we've got some great videos, which I can send you the links for, that show there's a changing their practice to embed physical activity at the heart of what they do. And that's everything from increasing physical education, coming up with new ideas around what they call active enrichment to broaden pupils' experiences, changing the commuting habits of pupils, integrating physical activity in classroom lessons, which I know we're probably going to talk about later. But we're seeing this kind of shift across the piece and the mindset of schools to appreciate physical activity really should be at the heart of what a school's trying to achieve. And if we get that right, how that benefits the school. And it's not just on the academic outcomes, which we know is important to those senior leadership teams and the broader educational system, but it's actually the culture of the school. And one of the major challenges we're seeing, not just in Bradford, but across England, is the number of children who aren't attending school. And we need to ask the question, why is that the case? And while schools aren't necessarily there to entertain, they should be engaging. And I think physical activity can play a really vital role within that. I'll probably finish there and hand over to yourself. And I could keep going for hours because there's lots of really interesting things in this space, but I guess we'll come back to it soon.
This is why we got you on. So do not apologize for speaking a lot. That's what you're here for. Absolutely. And something that you mentioned about the culture and this ethos and really embedding it. We've had many guests on already from within schools who are having some success with that. We get lots of listeners contacting us saying, I've tried to implement this, and it's commonly the headache is, like you said, you've got that inspirational teacher who's got a bit of a passion, a bit of capacity, and they may have a couple of others they can latch onto on that one. Alex, just to bring you in at this point, because obviously that's, I say the dream, it's the goal. It is a goal, not a dream, of really changing the ethos and culture throughout all the schools to ensure we're having the impact we want. What are you seeing from your perspective on what Andy's putting forward?
I can think of a very specific example, actually. And again, it comes out of Bradford. It's a school that Andy knows well, but Andy just brought up, obviously, the crisis around attendance currently. And there's a school right in the heart of Bradford with very poor health outcomes in a very deprived area, and called Academy St. James. And they're really one of the pioneering schools around creating active schools framework, or one of the first to implement it way back in 2019. Was it back in 2019?
Yeah.
And I was actually there last week with some Wakefield schools and Wakefield Council, because Chris Tolson, the head teacher over there, is opening his doors to other Bradford schools, but also I work with him to see if we can share that learning across the district. So they hosted an open afternoon just for a few Wakefield schools last week. And what they were showcasing was their transformational impact of these changes that they made over the past few years. And he actually spoke about attendance. And what they've done is after really looking at the Creating Active Schools framework and trying to think a little bit differently, they immediately hired a physical activity lead who would work on this agenda across the school and linked physical activity more heavily into their school improvement plan. But what they recognized on a Friday afternoon in particular, that children weren't ready, the children within that school weren't ready to take on new learning. And actually not too much teaching and learning was taking place on a Friday afternoon. And what they wanted to do was align physical activity and intervention with Rosenshine principles around retrieval and recall. So what they do now on a Friday afternoon, and have done for a number of years, is children will recall the previous learning for the week prior. And then immediately afterwards, they take part in an hour's worth of active enrichment, which is a range of broad, varied, non-traditional activities using lots of different environments around the school, the playground, the field, the corridors, the hall spaces, the classrooms. We're seeing noodle drumming in classrooms, tempered bowling in corridors, pool, floor SEND style activities in the hall, dance outside, loose parts play, scooting, tri-golf. All of these things we saw and are happening every single week and have done for a few years, thanks to the wonderful work of Niall O'Brien, who's now left the school, and Chris strategically overseeing it. But what that's done has completely revitalized Fridays. And Chris specifically mentioned to the head teachers in Wakefield that attendance has gone up on a Friday as a result. And they absolutely put that down to this, you mentioned earlier, children wanting to come to school on a Friday, whereas before they would have been inclined to potentially not want to. It's nearly the weekend. And naturally, some parents sometimes might also facilitate that to happen. But now they're wanting to come to school on a Friday because of the fun they're going to be having. They're knowing that they're going to be moving all afternoon. And that's just one specific example linked to attendance there.
On that one, I can hear some listeners' voices in my ear straight away with regards to what impact does that have on the children? You mentioned about the lack of engagement with regards to learning on a Friday afternoon, which I completely understand. How is, I'm in agreement with this. I love that idea. I love that thought. But thinking about those initiative leading people, innovative people in schools, how would they take that kind of idea to SLT and say, look, Friday afternoon, we're not doing any new learning as such. And I've heard of this fantastic thing up in Yorkshire. And how do they first approach that? Because it is a bit of a left field idea when you hear it first.
Well, I would say, and I'll come from the research perspective, and then Alex will come from a practical perspective. It's not just Friday afternoons. I think one of the things we're really poor at within the educational system is understanding energy management. I say we're poor at, we're actually not. We're actually quite good because we know what some of the we did some research work with schools up in the Northeast, and we looked at physical activity levels and then subject delivery frequency. And what we found out that it would be no surprise to your listeners, maths and English were the most commonly delivered subjects in the mornings. And then as the day went on, we got this kind of lovely wagon wheel of all the other subjects that schools weren't as directly accountable for as they were for maths and English. So we can see whether it's conscious or subconscious, they're delivering what they deem as the most important subjects in a morning. But beyond that, we're probably then not very good at managing energy. So, and by that, what I mean is we tend to have these lessons that can last anywhere from 8:30 or 9 o'clock up till 10:30. And then children go out for a break. And then they'll have 15 minutes if they're lucky, and then they'll do another stretch for an hour and a half, and then it's lunchtime. We know as adults that we can't concentrate for that amount of time, especially if we're sat in the same position. So the way we work with our schools in Bradford is we've helped them to understand energy management, and underneath that, it's brain science. So actually, how do you actually help pupils to concentrate? What do they need to help that to happen? How can you use physical activity to facilitate that? And we know there's lots of research now around children who are more physically active do better academically. We know that actually if you strategically use physical activity at certain segments in your day, and that's why we saw this kind of growth in brain breaks or classroom movement breaks to help with that. But I think we can make it more nuanced. And then you take it to the next stage, which is the active enrichment on a Friday, when, let's be honest, it's not just schools, it's workplaces as well, where most people are flagging by Friday afternoon because they've not managed themselves appropriately across the week. They've not thought about how do I almost do work in repetitions. I wouldn't go to the gym and try and blast out 60 bicep curls in one go. I'd give myself a break between each set, and I'd group the number of repetitions in sets with appropriate rest in between to enable me to recover enough to undertake the same set. It's almost like we don't apply that principle into education. So first thing you need to do, and it's quite a long-winded answer, is go to the science and draw on academics. And there's plenty of research out there. Go onto YouTube. There's lots of videos that will provide that kind of persuasive material for your head teachers to try and say, look, this is what the research is telling us, that we need to think about how children learn, how we package up that learning to maintain their concentration and interest. What was fascinating, I was over in another country earlier this week, and we're seeing it even at master's level. I was delivering a master's level session, and after 20 minutes, the students were losing concentration. So I think there's, as much as we've got lots of kind of pandemics and epidemics at the moment, I think we've got one around concentration as well, and helping schools to understand that. And the impact of that on educational and health outcomes is important. So over to you, Alex. What's the practical side?
We know each school is different. We know each setting, physical environment is different. So that's that active enrichment was what was needed, what they felt was needed at that school. And obviously processes were gone through to ensure that time was allocated and staff were supported to deliver it. And that's another key point, is that the teaching staff are delivering these activities, and that's just right for them. But we know that's not right for everybody. And I think, just to draw on the words of our good friends and colleagues at Move and Learn, who really promote the message around small steps and big difference. So I think if Andy's absolutely right, it's not a case of we do physical activity at this time of the week, throughout the week, to seamlessly integrate movement across the school day. And we know academic lessons are a great opportunity to do that, because that's where children spend most of their time, and all the research suggests are sitting down for the majority of that, particularly maths and English. So I think it'll be really a case of starting small, identifying what could be achieved, using the research that Andy's mentioned that is out there, and using the science, and making those links really explicit to senior management, to the head teacher, if they're not able to go there themselves, between movement and the impact on holistically and cognitively too. But it's really teachers listening, head teachers listening, know their staff. They know what's feasible, but It's really changing that mindset really to think a little bit differently, a little bit outside the box about what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What could we do differently? And what are those opportunities?
Yeah. And I think, again, schools work off impact data, don't they? Schools, I say they love data, they need data because of who they've got evidence to and so on. So that can be a driving message. And if you either of you have got any of those YouTube videos or any academic pieces Andy you mentioned, send those across and we'll put them out to our listeners. But just to follow on from what you were saying there, Alex, how would you then go about changing, I suppose, looking at it in more of a tangible way, the physical and social environment to facilitate active learning, physical active learning in the school? Are there things that our listeners can take away and go back to their school and look around and get the look for what can they change that's going on in the school, both visibly and socially?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the physical and social environment is obviously right to the heart of the Creating Active Schools framework, and two factors that need to be addressed and considered. It's almost undertaking a bit of an audit of the social environment and physical environment to see, really, we know all schools are different in terms of the physical environment. We can have leafy lane schools with lots of woods and fields and 2 playgrounds, 2 big halls, big classrooms, long corridor. And then we can have one in a city school with a sloping playground that floods at break time, no green space, tiny classrooms, 1 school hall, but 3 form entry. There's such a wide ranging difference in terms of physical environment. It's easy to sit there, having been in that position as a PE leader, and listen to a head teacher or listen to a PE leader talk about the wonderful work they're doing around whole school physical activity and providing lots of opportunities. And I'm sitting there thinking, that's great for you. You've got a massive field, you've got 2 playgrounds, you've got a small school, and I'm sitting here with completely different challenges in terms of space. So it's not about what the gold standard kind of in terms of the environment, but it's really unpicking, identifying first, and then really understanding how are we using those spaces that are at your disposal, the cards you've been dealt in terms of space. So the classrooms, are they as decluttered as possible? Do they facilitate movement between the tables and chairs? Is there a carpet space? Are resources strategically placed around the room that children have to move to go and get rather than being placed on desks? Again, is there a physical active learning resource box there in terms of the equipment that's available? So something that teachers can pick up and put down really easily. So we're eliminating transition time and barriers there. And how are we using the hall space? Is it just solely for PE, or actually could we begin to deliver maths, geography, whatever it might be within a hall space? And is it appropriately resourced so teachers on their fingertips can access videos on a big screen, or again, some tangible physical resources? We know schools are full of fixed resources that may have been there for a long time, be it playground markings, trim trails. And we know that in many cases, schools are still using the PE Sport Premium funding to fund those things. And obviously, there's a real issue there in terms of how that's being spent, obviously going against the conditions of the grant, but we see it happening. So if there's something historical around fixed resources, or a decision is being made around a fixed resource in the playground, well, actually, when we think about how many people are going to get active, how many children, should I say, are going to be getting active using that? Do teachers actually know how to facilitate movement using that fixed resource? And if not, how can we upskill them and improve their capability and motivation to do that? If there's an existing resource, trim child playground markings, well, could we upskill staff to actually use that resource to learn maths or learn writing and do some kind of fun learning games? So there's a lot of things to consider there in terms of the physical environment. Shall I pass over to Andy for the social environment? I could share some things, but I guess in terms of splitting up the answer between us, I imagine those opportunities to build the social environment, Andy.
Yeah, I think the social environment just comes down to what the conversations people are having around being physically active or movement, and are those conversations supportive, or actually do they eat away at those people who are sort of pioneering and trying new things out? The example I always use is if you've got a teacher who takes their pupils out into the playground to do number bonds, what are the rest of the teachers saying about that when they're looking out through the window with their class of pupils? And how are they commenting on that in the staff room? And actually, how do we then start to shape and change some of those conversations? And I think one of the key things there is thinking about, if the conversations aren't positive around physical activity, why is that the case? And sometimes that might be coming down to things like the knowledge of why children need to be active and the benefits associated with that. But it also might be down to the confidence of the teacher to be able to do something similar. So what might drive that kind of their negative response might be, I wish I could do that, but I don't feel comfortable. If I took my class out there, would I be able to control them? Actually, am I comfortable not being the teacher at the front controlling the class, but actually being more of a facilitator of learning? Do I have that skill set? And whether those thoughts are consciously going through their head or subconsciously going through their head, those are the kind of things that will drive the way people feel and then how they then express themselves. So it's a job, and it all comes back to this cultural piece. How do we change the culture of the school so that that physical activity is the natural thing to do? And I think just drawing back on what Alex said earlier around creating this kind of positive social culture is have a senior leadership team who promote risk taking. And by that, I mean giving teachers permission to try new things and not to fear failure. And we've seen the schools that have succeeded, not just in Bradford, but across England, are the ones where the senior leadership have given the teachers that permission to try things out and but not fear that. But you've got a number bond lesson where you want to do number bonds to 10, and you expect your pupils by the end of that lesson to be able to deliver against that number bond activity. Well, if you want to try a new way of approaching how they learn that, do you know what? It doesn't matter if it doesn't work. What I want you to do is put some energy in to inspire and enthuse your pupils, because actually, if the pupils are enthusiastic, whether you hit the target of them being able to complete number bonds to 10 by the end of the lesson, if they're enthused by what they've done and how they've learned, they might go away and start trying to practice that at home. Or actually, if we stick with these sort of traditional learning methods where we sit them down and drill them in a classroom, let's be honest, would you want to go home and practice? I certainly wouldn't, because it's not something that I've seen as enjoyable, unless we're a bit weird and we really enjoy. I do enjoy maths, actually. But whether we really enjoy maths, and we might take it home. But it's sort of changing that culture on a number of ways and on a number of different levels that gives permission to the teachers just to try and not be scared of failing at that, what we call an acute level, a 1 lesson or a 2 lesson. If it doesn't work, try something else. And I think that's definitely landed. And that, to me, is how we start to create this positive social culture in schools.
Yeah, and that it rings a bell with, and there's a multitude of physical active learning programs and resources out there. For example, with Maths on the Move, English on the Move, when I speak to schools about those programs, part of the conversation that I always make sure I have with schools is yes, this is there to have an impact. It's there to have an impact to improve regards children's attainment and confidence in the subjects. Of course it is. Providing that different learning environment and changing that experience for the child. But something I always like to get across is we're not just doing the impact on attainment. We want the confidence, because what we want to do is, if we can build the relationship between that child and the subject that we're doing there, that's something that's going to impact their educational career and beyond. Yeah. If we having that positive impact on that relationship, we all know, we all probably had that 1 or 2 subjects, whether it's primary school, secondary school, you did not have a relationship with it, whether it was the way it was taught, whether it was the subject yourself you didn't get on with, whatever it might have been, we all had that. And we all had the flip side of the subject that we enjoyed, or a couple of subjects that we enjoyed. And again, it may well be down to the experiences that we had and not necessarily the content that we're learning. So for me, it really resonates with what you said there. And it's massively important to tap into that relationship, because when I'm delivering programs in schools myself, I could see those children who had a great relationship with the subject, but less of a positive relationship with physical activity, and how they changed in themselves over the period of a half term, a term. But also on the flip side, those that had the positive relationship with activity and the not so positive with the subject. And it's really trying to find the best environment and way to tap into children's enthusiasms, for want of a better phrase, which I think goes full cycle back to the culture aspects, the physical aspects that you were talking about, Alex, with how we use the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've steered obviously towards moving and learning, physical active learning, which is obviously a wonderful opportunity. But I think also it's worth, we seem to in schools, and again, having, 13 years a teacher myself, is that whenever there's a whole school approach to another priority area, whether it's reading, whatever it might be, take the read writing, very good experiences of using that strategy to teach children to read. It has a real impact. But if you think about the processes, the social environment that is created from the top down to support the staff to deliver read writing effectively, to meet the needs of the pupils and achieve better outcomes. We will have whole school training, but there is a CPD pathway throughout that year consistently. It's talked about in staff meetings. It's part of learning walks or observations or performance management. If new teachers come into the school, whether it's student teachers or a new teacher that's been employed, they are upskilled using those techniques because that is part of the school culture. This is how we teach reading. This is what we would like you to do. Often with physical active learning, resources, maths on the move, things like that, it's often we say to the teachers, here's the resource. We might have one isolated training session, but then it's off you go. And we know teachers don't always have that many teachers don't have that confidence to facilitate movement within lessons. It can be daunting. There can be behavioral barriers or expectation that there will be. There's a number of barriers or hurdles to get over for staff to deliver the teaching in this way. But we just expect them to go and do that. But we don't do that with other priorities or whole school approaches. So it's really we're doing this through the CAS framework, open the eyes of head teachers and support physical education leads or physical activity leads in schools to really recognize that and adopt approaches that they do very naturally and very, in many ways, with other priorities, but just treating physical activity approaches the same.
Yeah. And that's, like I said, there's different things, there's different resources and methods out there with regards to whether it's delivered by someone in the school, whether it's something that you're being trained on, whether it's a resource you buy in, whether it's an external organization delivering these side of things. And you mentioned about the CPD pathway there. I'm going to delve into that a little bit more and put this open to both of you. But what are your thoughts on initial teacher training itself and the curriculum being altered to incorporate this kind of teaching and learning we talk about changing the culture, but for more of a long-term shift across education, which I know is a bit of a dreamland. If you don't have a dream, you can't set a goal and so on and so forth. But I'd just leave that open to whoever wants to respond first, really, but really taking it back to a teacher training and changing that to incorporate these kind of learning and teaching and learning styles.
Yeah. It sort of segues really nicely into a project that was funded by the European Union, where we worked with 5 other countries to develop a teacher training curriculum. Because one of the issues challenges we've had up to this day in physically active learning is we haven't had a core set of skills that we've identified that need to be developed. Everybody's done it in their own individual way. So as part of that project, we went through all the research literature. We spoke to some sort of pioneering teachers, teacher trainers and researchers to understand what are those core skills that teachers need to become proficient in using physically active learning. So there is a free now European curriculum that anyone can use, whether it's a university, a teacher training organization, a private enterprise who's doing CPD. There's a curriculum that should underpin the approach that we take to train teachers around using physically active learning. In terms of integrating it within higher education, sometimes I think we're very guilty, and this isn't just in the physical activity field, that we expect change to happen overnight. And I'm one of those people, I get frustrated that we've been doing this for 5 years, and why aren't HE institutions embedding physically active learning? And all the evidence is there. We know how to do it. But it's systems change, and systems change takes an extremely long time. For me, I would say in the next 5 to 10 years, I would hope to see that using, and it's interesting. So the research literature, and I was involved in this, we call it physically active learning. And actually that really is coming from a bit of a health paradigm. So physical activity is a health or sport-based terminology. It's not necessarily education terminology. So how do teachers or teacher training organizations then perceive physically active learning? Is it more so about the physical rather than the learning? And we know it's not, but we can understand that perception. And there was an article, I remember Bryn Llewellyn, someone who I know really well, who obviously Tag-to-Eight Move and Learn, and he got a notion passed at the head teacher conference that physical activity should be integrated within the delivery of academic content. And then one of the newspapers the next day had something like the headline of children running around classrooms like headless chickens. And it just showed this kind of fear of what we were trying to achieve. So actually, there's been within some of the academic literature, there's been this sort of attempt to shift the naming of it to movement-centered pedagogy, which actually starts to create more of an ownership by education. Because if we think the majority of teacher training is not done by physical activity practitioners, lecturers, educators, it's actually being done by education lecturers. So actually we need to be using terminology and presenting movement-centered pedagogy into that paradigm of education and something that's much more acceptable to them. And then, so we've now got the curriculum that can be used, but equally important to the curriculum is the journey that we then take teachers on. And this was, sometimes when you do research, you're doing research, you pretty much know what's going to come out of it at the end. And it's confirming what you thought. What was really interesting and exciting from the Activate project was the insights helped us to understand the learning journey that we need to take teachers on. And it, alluding back to what Alex was saying around how do we train teachers, what do they value, so on and so forth. And there was I'd say I personally had underestimated the amount of foundation building we needed to do before we actually started to progress into this long-term learning journey and to prevent these kind of one-off workshops that we generally tend to see. And one of the things that really opened my eyes, and it was like, how on earth have we not thought in this way before? Is I think from a physical activity perspective, we're very guilty of selling something that people don't necessarily want. So if you imagine, and this is a big generalization, and I know a lot of people who listen to this will be really into physical activity. I'll be going, what on earth are you on about? But think about the most reluctant teacher. The teacher who is not physically active themselves, probably had terrible experiences with physical activity, physical education, sport when they were younger. That's who we're trying to reach. How do you do that? They're not going to buy physical activity because it's not something that they particularly want to get involved in. So we need to go to their world. And actually so two things came out was understanding what's their initial mindset. Why did you get into teaching? What does teaching mean to you? What is it you're trying to achieve through your teaching? What is it that you value as a teacher? Very different way of working. And then try to go, actually, some of those things that you've mentioned around pupil happiness, being engagement in the classroom, actually just paying attention and listening to you and making life a bit easier. Okay. Have you thought about how physical activity or movement-centered pedagogy and using that style of teaching and learning might actually help you to achieve that? Okay, we're now onboarded you. We've helped with your initial mindset. Right, what's the next stage of that development? We're actually going to show you this in practice. So actually, we might come in and deliver it with your class to help you see the benefits and actually how your pupils respond to that. Or we'll deliver it on the training course with the other 15 teachers to see how are you interacting and engaging, and how do you find it? So we're building that awareness and appreciation of what it is. And then, okay, now we're going to help you to get started. And I think this is another thing that we're really guilty of in the field. We make it far too complicated. Actually, what we want is advanced practitioners who don't need to rely on resources, can integrate it anywhere in their lessons, and so it's truly integrated physical activity. That's like an advanced high-level practitioner. That's the end journey. But how do we get there? We need to start really small. So that's where I would encourage, whether it's higher education establishments or private enterprise, to think, what are the resources that we can provide that will support teachers to get started and enable them to use those resources across multiple different learning activities, across different subject areas, try them out to get comfortable. Because the next thing is, we know if a teacher tries something, it doesn't go well, what happens? They drop out. They don't try it again because it was painful, and nobody likes pain. So actually, we need to give the teachers this almost the safest way to try it the first time, to reduce that chance of failure, and then start to then build very slowly. So when we move past that onboarding stage is start simple. What's the easiest way you can do PAL? And that might be multiplication relays in the playground. And someone else might look at that and go, but that's not truly physically active learning. It's, well, you don't really need, no, maybe not, but it's a good way to get started. Or play stick in the mud, TIG in the playground. The kids are exhausted in the afternoon. Maybe you need to do some retrieval work or just going back over previous material. Put your number bonds on a series of cards. If a kid gets tugged, someone goes up to them with a question card. If they answer the question correctly, they're freed and off they go again. So it's a little bit of fun activity. The kind of chance that might go wrong is fairly limited. We're building the teacher's confidence. What I would then say is about taking small steps. But if things don't go right, and this is a little bit of a pushback against the teacher body, is growth mindset. That was a huge program across schools over the last, 5 years. Constantly we're hearing growth mindset. Pupils see the growth mindset. So do teachers. You've got, go on, sorry. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I think the process you've spoken through there, to all our listeners listening to this episode, what I'd probably suggest is rewind 5 minutes maybe, and all the questions Andy's just been asking there, pause it, write it down, answer it. Next question, pause it, write it down, answer it, and go through. What Andy's done there is giving a really brief overview, don't get me wrong, but an overview, step-by-step guide of initial thoughts. So I always ask for gems, what's your top 5 tips and so on in the podcast, and we'll get to that in a bit. But I think a good little one here is, anyone listening to this episode, pause it here for a second, rewind, write those down, do that task, and we'll carry on from that point. Because what I want to touch on is I want to go back across to Alex actually, and everything you were talking about, Andy, I couldn't agree with more. And all of that will begin to change the culture within the school. Knowing how the education system works and how schools have to work just because of due diligence, governance, and so on and so forth. It's then look at the other side of things and building on what we've discussed already, but then looking at how do we embed. Now, you mentioned PAL, but movement and pedagogy and so on and so forth, whichever terminology we're going for, how do we embed that into policy within the school? And is that something that's feasible? So, Alex, I just want to get back to the practical application from your angle there, building on what Andy said. Is it something that can be built into school policy, and how do our listeners go about looking at that side of things?
Yeah, I think it's probably most appropriate to draw upon my own experience of that, really. And actually it's prior to the role I'm in now, and is take me back to when I was a primary school teacher and physical education lead within the last school that I left before stepping into this role. And having been to many conferences, CPD courses within the network for a number of months and years, And it was just when movement-centered pedagogy, physical active learning was really becoming more and more relevant, and more research was being built up around the impact of it. And there was a big growth of organizations that were there to support schools around this approach. And I was currently working in a school where the children and young people had very challenging home lives, a very deprived area of Leeds, a lot of children suffering from trauma historically, and that translated into learning behaviors in terms of children might be sleeping a little bit in desks, coming across extremely tired, not engaged within lessons. And while at the same time, I was hearing all this research and this impact from this approach, and we weren't doing any of this in school. So I jumped on that and went through a process similar to what we've talked about here, sitting the head teacher down and saying, I'd like to try a little bit of a pilot within the school, within a lesson for my year 3/4s, who I think are completely bored by French. I'm bored teaching it. I'm not good at French. I'm really winging it. And they know I'm winging it. It's just painful for all of us. I said, I want to switch it up because they're an active group. They like the sports and the movement. So I thought, give me 6 weeks to try some techniques, some strategies with these year 3 and 4s, but specifically across the French curriculum. And I'm going to take videos, I'm going to evidence it, and then we're going to sit down at the end of the 6 weeks. So then, unbeknownst to other staff, I started delivering active French essentially for 6 weeks in the playground, in the classroom, with beanbags, doing numbers, with all these kind of different techniques that Andy's kind of spoken about there. Videoed the children in action. We did some recorded work potentially after it too, because obviously, if they're moving, how can they record work? Actually, the movement led into some recorded work, and presented that to the head teacher after 6 weeks, that this is the impact that it's had on these year 3/4 children. They've gone from here to here. We need to scale this up. And their answer immediately, yeah, absolutely. Like, I can't ignore this. If it's going to meet the needs of our pupils. So to come to the crux of the question in terms of how do you embed it within policy, again, that is obviously entirely a school decision, obviously, in terms of knowing their staff. And we're seeing from future learning with the current learning we're creating active schools who are prioritizing movement across the curriculum. They are embedding it within policy in different ways. The approach we took at my previous school was to build it within performance management. So we engaged the staff. I engaged the staff with the support of SLT around the learning, this kind of almost little pilot that I did in my class. This is the impact. We built in some consistent CPD throughout the year for me to bring all the teachers together to upskill them, to then share good practice, what's working, what isn't. In between that, there was some one-to-one coaching and mentoring. I was given time to then go into the classrooms, to really look at these activities being delivered. And then I would support the member of staff afterwards to say, maybe try this. That was wonderful, et cetera, et cetera. We created those social forums throughout the year, staff briefings, 5 minutes at the beginning of a staff briefing, 15 minutes every 2 weeks within within the staff meeting after school to talk and share ideas about how it's going. So we were seeing activities take place in nursery that the year 6 children were also accessing. Phase planning meetings when they're planning for the next half term, staff were encouraged to build it into that. So it was built into performance management. SLT very clearly said, we want you to teach in this way. When we do our informal learning walks, we want to see those types of things. We want to see children in classroom, in corridors, in the hall, outside. Going back to what's the mindset of the staff, to what Andy said, what the response of the staff members, it was really building that culture and that positive response. Oh, they're doing that. Oh, I better do that too. So it was specifically built into performance management plan. And it was part of their meetings moving forwards. And I was part of that. What they've started to do since but the school, I should say, they don't have to be too prescriptive. Our head teacher felt that we wanted to initially say, try to do one or two lessons, 10 minutes here or there, within lessons throughout the week to just get used to this, get confident. Like Andy said, get confident. And quite prescriptive after a while. But what we found organically, what naturally was occurring, that kind of was like that kick up the bum, so to speak, to say, okay, I'm going to try 2 lessons. But then after 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, 10 minutes twice a week became 4 times a week, became 6, because they were naturally getting more confident and were supported through it. What we've seen since I left and what we're seeing through some schools nationally with creating active schools, I can think of one specifically locally in Doncaster, it's now being embedded within recruitment policy. A job description goes out to bring teachers into the school. This is how we teach. Are you a teacher that encourages movement within lessons and is enthusiastic to facilitate and support? We're seeing specific job descriptions. In fact, I can think my previous school I was on Facebook the other day, 2 days ago, and they have just gone out for a Key Stage 2 teacher and a Key Stage 1 teacher 4 years after me leaving, and their job descriptions still say, can you promote movement within lessons, etc. That is the legacy from the work we did a few years ago. We're bringing in teachers that want to teach in this way. And if they don't, we're going to support them to teach in this way. And you've had to chime in there.
Yeah. And I think just to hit on, there's a point here around how do we carry on building that system? And some of the conversations I've been in is we can train students in ITT to use physically active learning, but then what happens when they go into their school placements?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then teachers are saying, we don't teach like that here.
So that's not how we do it.
That's not how we do it here. So again, it's about each part of the system needs to play its part. So how do we support the schools to use physically active learning or movement centered pedagogy so that when their ITT students are arriving on their placements, that they're supporting what they're learning at university? So back to you, Alex.
No, I was going to chip in there as well. And as I'm really conscious because I gave our listeners instructions on to pause and go back through the steps you gave, Andy. I'm going to say the same for what Alex has just done. Right? Everyone listening to this episode, go back. If you haven't already, pause it. Make the notes of the step-by-step that Alex went through. There's evidence there that it works. Take the small steps, build the confidence, which I think is a key message from both of you today is don't look at this as the end journey. I'm pretty sure you've said that a few times. Don't look at it as the end goal. Take the small steps, do the small things, try it out with a section of time with your own class, see what the impact is. Don't skim over the bits that Alex has mentioned with regards to taking videos, recording the impact, because that's really what's going to help with you with the next step conversation to get the buy-in from SLT and your colleagues. So go back, listen to what Alex has just said and note those down, because what you've got there is 2 clear, pretty much how-to guides from both our fonts of knowledge. And I'm a bit conscious on time, but Alex, did you just want to finish that? Is there anything else you want to finish up on that bit before we went on to some key tips and things to round this fascinating episode off?
In terms of the previous question, Dan?
Yeah.
And I think between myself and Andy pretty much covered it there in terms of those policy changes. I think it's really just understanding I know I didn't like to be always told what to do as a teacher, be really prescriptive. That's not something that I know I didn't react to very well. And why would we? But so it's really about, in terms of those policy changes, understanding, particularly when talking about performance management, that there's a fine line between, we'd like you to do this, but then we're telling you to do this. So it's just those little tweaks that can be made to build the motivation and confidence of staff. But I think we just about covered it there.
Fantastic. Now, so my standard question feels slightly null and void with the amount of gems that you guys have given throughout. So instead of asking you each for 5 key tips, I'm going to really challenge you guys and narrow it down. And only 2 things. So everyone listening to this episode, if you were going to advise them to do just 2 things, so following listening to this episode, what would they be? And I'm going to come to Alex. I'm going to come to you first. 2 things. Andy's celebrating. He's got time to whittle it down.
Right, I've got more
Can we-
time.
we do one each? Can we do one each? Can we be I think we've mentioned, as you said, Dan, we've mentioned a number of things. I think that small steps, big difference, to coin the phrase of Brynn Ian at Move and Learn, is absolutely crucial to any change you're wanting to make around culture and policy and practice. Is to start small, think about those tiny habits, particularly in terms of physically active learning. But I guess something we've not touched upon, which is really reflected in the national Creating Active Schools data, and again, particularly locally in West and South Yorkshire with schools we're working with, is around monitoring and evaluation, and that there are still, schools are still struggling to really unpick what monitoring and evaluation of physical activity within school, and understanding how to do it, and etc. And CAS is drawing out a lot of learning around that's an area of development. So what I would urge schools to do, because it's again within the physical activity within school, in that world, we often do things because we've done it for years. And a PE leader might come in and take over a PE lead role, and for the last 10 years, they've maybe worked with the same organization, doing the same things every single year, or other examples of that. And the temptation is to pick it up, continue it. We've always done that. And there might be an absolutely valid reason why that's the case, because it's having a huge impact. It's getting children active. Fantastic if it is. But what I would urge schools to do is, maybe off the back of this, is really reflect on the current provision within their school, how they are getting children active, who they are engaging with with that support. And to really unpick, is it working? Is it right for our school? Why are we doing that? Is it working? Is it getting the most amount of children possibly active within our school? Is it inclusive provision? Are we isolating certain groups of children because of this, or are we not? And really understand that. Why are we doing what we are currently doing? And if it isn't working, why do we continue to do it? And ask ourselves those questions. And obviously, there are a number of things we can do to really understand that. Gathering effective pupil voice, not just at a school council, but across the board. And that might be linked to a certain bit of provision. Clubs. If this is our club provision, is this what children want? Is this actually getting 100% of our children active, or 10%? Is it getting the same children active because it's just the same children turning up? Ask yourself these questions. And obviously, there are a number of toolkits out there that can support you around monitoring and evaluation and things like that. But that has to be the starting point for me, and link that into PE Schools for premium funding as well, because obviously that is something, again, where we're seeing the same things being spent on year after year, using that funding that aren't having the impact that they should. And we're not getting bang for our buck in terms of getting pupils active using funding. So really, really deep dive into that. That was a very long, kind of not well articulated answer there. But hopefully Andy's top tip is better than that one.
No. It was still a gem. Doesn't matter. It was still a gem, and definitely, I think you could probably draw two, three, maybe four out of that. So thank you, Alex. Andy, your challenge now,
No problem,
is to this top tip, succinct top tip that someone's going to go, yeah, I can do it. Okay, so number one, use the Creating Active Schools framework to understand your current situation. So maybe do a mapping exercise using the framework, which you can download for free. Get some Post-it notes, get your whole school together and write down everything you're doing around physical activity and stick it onto the framework to see where your strengths are and where your gaps are. Because what that will enable you to do is understand what your current assets are, and then how you might be able to build on those assets to strengthen what you're doing within schools. So that's tip one. Tip two is, quite often we build programs or expectations that are very difficult to do and therefore require a lot of motivation. So think about the people that we're working with will have low motivation. So therefore we need to make it easy. So the majority of people, if you think something called the innovation distribution curve, come in the middle section or two middle sections of that curve. And what we know from research is you need to make it easy and you need to show value. So I think Alex's example of how he built it in his school did those two things. He demonstrated the value by trialing something to the head teacher. That value was spread to the staff. And then they made it easy by having a really low expectation of what they wanted the staff to do. I'm going to come in with a very third shameful promotion, which is we have an international conference at the University of Bradford in June this year, where we are bringing together research, policy and practice. So if you're someone who sat there thinking, how do I start this in my school? How do I get access to that information Andy was talking about in terms of benefiting or persuading head teachers to, embrace physical activity? All of that's going to be talked about in this conference. We'll be doing loads of action planning on the second day around top tips of how to embed it in your school. So we would love to see you there, and we will share the link to the conference, hopefully, in the blurb underneath.
Yeah, you absolutely will. And I'd say it's more shameless than shameful. And I was actually going to point you that direction. So it's good you put it out. But I do have to wrap it up there. I just want to say a massive thank you to you both for your input. Thank you so much for your gems and your time today, gents. It's been fascinating listening to you both and being able to engage in this conversation. So thank you so much. And yet we will be sharing about the conference. We'll have a look to share the link, as Andy said, as well as has been mentioned on this episode with regards to research pieces as well. We'll find a way to get that to all of you listening to this episode. And well, hopefully there'll be many more gems and nuggets, whatever phrase you want to use in there. So thank you again, Alex. Thank you, Andy. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been absolutely fantastic. And, I hope everyone has enjoyed listening to us today.
Pleasure. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for listening. Join us next time for the Primary PE Huddle podcast. And remember to subscribe wherever you access your pods so you don't miss an episode and the key gems our fantastic guests share with you. You can connect with us on Twitter or X at Aspire Sports UK and find out more about us and the fact www.aaeg.co.uk and www.aspire-ed.co.uk for PE CPD related courses and more content. Hope to see you. Thanks for listening.